Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us in the world. My name is Brian Anthony. I'm the Associate Director of MIT.nano, and we're coming to you live today, live in person and virtually from the Immersion Lab, located in the Lisa Su building at MIT, MIT.nano. The Immersion Lab is a central and shared facility at MIT to help the world, to help the community engage the digital, and the virtual, and the physical. It's an open and shared facility to enhance the opportunities for artists, for engineers, for scientists, for educators, to develop augmented and virtual reality, to put the physical touch into the digital world, and vice versa. Immersed is our monthly series, part tutorial, part lecture, to immerse you in a number of the different exciting creative energy research activities that our students, that our faculty, and that our collaborators are engaging in. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Immersed in Augmented Textiles as the talk, but even a greater pleasure to introduce Ganit Goldstein, who is a student at MIT in the Master of Science in Architecture Studies in Computation. She's a research assistant at MIT's Self-Assembly Lab and a fellow of the Morningside Academy of Design. So her talk today is going to be sharing her work on the relationships between physical materials in a digital space. Just one other point of coordination. Please feel free to text your questions, chat your questions as we go, and Talas Rex and Praneeth Namburi, the staff here will help to answer questions, and we'll also have a Q&A at the end. Ganit, it's a great pleasure to have you joining us today. We're very excited to hear your talk. I turn it over to you to share the exciting work that you're doing in immersion in augmented textiles, relationships with physical materials in a digital space. Take it away, please.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
You're coming through loud and clear.
Perfect. So it's really a pleasure to present my work here. I have a few people that I see in the audience that I am familiar with, so I'm happy to extend also to the people that I don't know and get to know you all. I need a permission to share my screen, so maybe you
hold on one second. We'll deal with that. Apologies. 1 second. You should be try going sharing now.
Yeah, perfect. So let's go back to the start. And
very good. Okay.
Okay. So now you can all see my screen, I think. Yeah, so I will be speaking about augmented textiles, and I think we will discover together what it means, because there are lots of things that are connected to computational workflow and textile design and what it means to have fabrics that has different dimensions embedded. But I will start by introducing myself. I'm a graduate student in the architecture department, and my background is fashion and textile design. I study bachelor degree in fashion and jewelry in the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem, and then I study a master degree in textile in the soft system program in the Royal College of Art in London. And in my work, I'm interested in the meaning of embedding new functions into wearables and finding new ways that digital and physical connections can be formed through the medium of 3D printing textiles. So we will also discover a bit what it means to 3D print textile and what's the benefits of using this kind of tools, additive manufactured tools. But I'm interested in how data and functions can be connected to create these customized systems. And then how additive manufacturing can be related to both the engineering and the design workflow, and how we can implement programmable materials into the design, and how all of this can be kind of a soft system that's implementing the connection between sensory experiences to have an enhanced, impactful product and experiences. And my background work is using multi-material 3D printing garments, also for personalized accessories, and I'm researching how we can embed new technologies for customization, but also I'm really interested in the workflow. So how we can make things that's connected to 3D body scan, and how we actually manufacture the things that having this data of the scan. And for many years, the ways that we produce fabrics didn't really change in the ways that we produce actually garments. So there are lots of techniques of cut and sew. That's the main way we produce it, but then it's very hard. It's not yet fully finalized how we are making customization. And so there are a few techniques of knitting, but it's very hard to implement the knowledge of 3D body scan, because it's complex, it's different data, and fabrics are designed in a way that it's based on real yarns, and we are working in the digital way. So there are a lot of things to discover, and one of the things that I'm interested in is also in the connection between computers and textiles, and it's really rooted in many historical references. And one of the references that is the most known one is the Jacquard loom, where the collection of punch card connected to a continuous sequence, and that's how it's operating the machine to have kind of a 0 and 1s that representing the patterns of the holes. And then the Jacquard loom is basically known as the basic principles of also building the foundation of the first computer. So this is a bit of a work that I've been doing in a collaboration with Tiska, and you can really see each hook is represent different pattern and different yarns that connected, and it's basically building this fabric. And I've been working with them to implement different conductive threads and different types of threads to see how it can be implemented inside the patterns. But really what we are talking about is what it means to have augmented textiles. And for me, it's divided to 4 different aspects, and we will speak about them. But the idea of connecting text and textiles, so it's kind of the coding behind the fabrics, and how that connected to a material ID, and what it actually means to have ID inside materials, and how this kind of augmented textiles connected to a body language. Is it a new language? Is it connected to a different language that we don't know yet? And then how we are building this customization of garments through this augmented feature. And when I'm designing virtually, and I think lots of people can also relate, it's really has no borders. So how we are creating new digital space when it's related to body, are we mimicking the behavior of our motion, or are we designing new behaviors, and how fabrics are reacting digitally? Is it different way? Is it a simulation of the fabric? So all of these kind of questions I'm asking while I'm designing. But I want to go a bit to my background. In my bachelor degree, I was really fortunate to go to Tokyo University of the Art to study their traditional textile design. And it's really affected of how I'm thinking in the digital space. So that's why I'm presenting that. But it's this type of fabrics were produced with rice paste, and it's called katazome, and it's a really, really long process of how you make fabric, but you really work with your hands, and you dye. This is a kimono that I made by the shibori techniques, which is also textile dyeing techniques. And that's an ikat weaving that I learned there, which is also a very complex pattern making inside the weaving process when you dye the yarns prior to the weaving on the loom. And all of these are really experimenting with materials in a very physical way. So those were the outcomes of what I've made in Japan. But I find it really interesting that everything was very much hands-on. There were nothing that was digitally. And I learned a lot by learning how you see things, how you feel. And there are a lot of things that you don't have these possibilities inside the virtual space. So for me, my research area back then and still continuing was how you merge these past technologies into the future and really thinking about the relationship between them. So I've been working with 3D multicolor printing to implement colors inside additive manufacturing processes, and also kind of 3D scanning body form and trying to reverse engineering the body and having the different patterns. So I will go through a bit of the project that I made that connected. Everything has a 3D printing aspect inside the garment, and some of them have like a craft method that's embedded inside. So that was back in 2018, and it's a collection that merged this body scan with the yarn art, textile art that I learned there. This was a project that implemented 3D printing inside a yarn process, so it's kind of a layering them together. And it was almost weaving with kind of a computer agent, because I learned how I can manipulate colors in the digital space and implement it in physical way. So that's a collection of issues that I made, but it's really not just about the outcome, but it's also about the process of implementing yarns. And one of the interesting things that happened in the right shoe was that people really thought that this kind of 3D printed statue is made by fabric, but it's actually just a representation of fabric. So everything is here 3D printed inside the design. But then I moved into more kind of balancing between them. So implementing 3D printing with leather. So it's printed directly onto the leather, and having this kind of a hybrid workflow between handcrafted of shoe design and 3D printing. So there are a lot of discovery that I made through the time, but it's all about also personalization and how you design in the physical world. So I'm scanning the foot, and then I'm designing on top of the body, and then I'm 3D printing it again. So it's kind of back and forth, and it's a really learning curve through the time. This was a large scale, so it's a bigger production that I made 2 years ago, part of the Horizon 2020 grant, and it was a study of a full printed 3D printed garment without any sewing. So all the joints are embedded inside the design, and all the colors and the implementation of different materials are embedding in the CAD design. But it's also having 200 embroidery pieces that are implemented inside the kimono fabric, and then it has this kind of relationship between the physical materials and the digital CAD design. So this is also one example that I made. It's a collaboration with Stratasys, and we worked on this kind of method of printed garments. That was in Milan Design Week just few months ago. But it's also really about trying to reverse engineering the body form and trying to translate kind of the relationship between areas in the body into a construction of a garment. So what it really means to have an an immersive experience using VR and AR. I've been studying this connection also from the architecture scale, so not just a body scale, but thinking about the environment and how we are connecting haptic experiences and tactile interaction inside VR experiences, and how, and the most recent project that I will show today was also with the immersion lab, that we worked on body and motion relationship and kind of building this second skin study. But also, I think if you also have any insights of what you feel about the connection between textiles and body gestures, and how this kind of words of virtual and physical are connected, and how accurate the information from reality should be in the virtual space. Should it be the same? Maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we can implement different data sets inside the virtual space that we cannot in the reality. And then I'm asking how these kind of connections can be embedded in functions, and both in the analog and the digital space. So this was an immersive experience using VR to present some of the outfits that I made in kind of a VR museum. So you can see the garment in 3-dimensional, and you can see it in 2-dimensional on a model, but then you can really interact and see and feel, almost go really deep into the design of a 3D garment, and really feel it much closer than just a picture. So that was also thinking about the experience through textiles and through the medium of 3-dimensional garments, but also really thinking how in the virtual space we can design experiences, and how we can present in a different way. So, and in some ways also, I've been studying what type of information we can communicate through storytelling in the virtual environment. And I think that's where we will go a bit to the zoom out in the architecture scale. That was the project that I've been studying with a workshop on augmented historical pedagogy, part of the architecture workshop. And we traveled to Berlin, a group of 15 of us, to 3D scan and learn about Tiergarten Park, and design immersive experiences with VR. But we also learned the historical references of the park in Berlin. And this project was dealing with the changes that happened along 100 years of the Rose Garden inside Tiergarten. And we kind of made this workflow in the VR experience that you can see 100 years of changes in the garden and explore really what it means. And so we study what changes along the time and between the wars and between the changes of the landscape, but also we were really going around and seeing what kind of statues were implemented inside there and where it's today. So we went to different areas and rescanned the statue, for example, and the deer, and then we implemented those statues inside a virtual experience. So we kind of build our own gardens that have lots of years embedded inside it, and then really learning where it was located and relocated it in the virtual space. So that's a bit of where I see the balance between historical references and then how you implement new realities inside a VR experience. But if we are going back to fabric scale, and we think about new functionalities that we are embedding, so it's not only historical references, but how we can build textiles that could respond to body gestures. And this study was part of my master's degree in the Royal College of Art, where I study how flower shapes can be changed along the time through a gesture of a hand hovering. And I've been working with embroidery for a while and studying how we can implement different functionalities inside, but it wasn't just about the process of embroidery, but also thinking about layering what's actually can be functioned differently. And I was really fortunate to work with a company called Sara. It was a part of Tada residency in Switzerland, and we worked on a large scale embroidery pattern. It was more than 1 meter square, and we implemented conductive threads inside the making process of the embroidery, and that's a bit of the process of how we work together. But it was the first time that they implemented conductive threads in a large scale production. And from my perspective, I also worked on a VR experience that also having another dimension embedded inside to have this correlation between the virtual space, the virtual fabric, and the physical fabric. So basically, it was a design of two different of the same fabric in the digital space and in the virtual space. And once you hover your hand on top, it's changing many things. So it could change the color, it could change the shape, it could change the sound. So kind of planning what's the embedded functions that can be happening when you correlate physical and digital fabrics. But also, when we think about smart textiles, sometimes it's not really yet connected to smart garments, which is also an interesting conversation. How can we embed functions inside a garment, and what's this correlation of the study within our body scale? Because it's easy to have textiles, it's a bit more far from our skin, but really what's the question that I'm asking now, and we will go through it really soon, is how we are mapping our body through motion analyzing. And the study that we were doing together in the immersion lab was really to study how we can produce data-driven textiles to produce customized garment manufacturing and connect it to manufacturing. So it's not just to produce the textiles, but thinking about the entire process of producing fabrics that has the ability to embed the scanning. And I think from my perspective, I see this kind of gap between the data, the body data, and the textile and garment construction. And then the gap, it's basically in the translation between the textile manufacturing, this kind of gathering of body data, and the material properties. So these are the three aspects that I'm studying also together with the immersion lab. And we were trying to break it to what are we researching, what we are analyzing. And there are lots of things happening through this research, but it's really about analyzing and aligning information. So there is motion tracking, there is a strain map, there is 3D scanning, there is 2D and 3D translation of surfaces, and there is the idea of body mapping and what's actually, what are we mapping? So we were starting with production of a customized suit, and we 3D scanned this suit to be able to correlate the physical body form into the digital space. So I put this kind of yeah, I don't know if you see here, but there is this kind of stone in the computer that it's really hard to work with CAD software. So even though you have lots of knowledge in CAD design, sometimes when you're dealing with scanning, it's a huge data set. So it's either polygons or point clouds, but it's very hard to manipulate this kind of data. And what we were working was to make this kind of suit that we can map through the areas in the body, and then making this setup that I have the digital version and the physical version of the scan of the suit correlating the same. And we worked on motion tracking to correlate this motion embedded inside the suit. So usually it's very difficult to correlate this information when we want to manufacturing the garment. So we were studying different pose, different like translation of motion, and then studying how we can implement this kind of movement inside the fabric. So one of the things that was one of the hardest things I think that happened was how we can translate the frozen body scan and into a motion tracking and to animate this movement to correlate the same. But that's also with the support of Tuller and Thalys, we worked on this correlation of the scan with the motion tracking and trying to analyze this kind of movement. So that was one of the steps that was not so easy to correlate this kind of information of a frozen and motion tracking.
Thank you so much for sharing your work. I mean, we've worked in the together the past couple of months, and it's been really awesome to see kind of all the different types of data, everything from photogrammetry to motion capture. And so handling all of these different types of data is definitely a feat. So let's go ahead and start with the questions and answers. We do have a couple questions in chat, so I'll start with those. And then if we have some time left over, we can, feel free to chat. So the first question here, what are the joints like on the clothing that are fully 3D printed?
So it's kind of rethinking zippers. So it's really kind of like a zipper that's designed to have in a 3D space. So I designed everything. It's kind of a puzzle. It's made out of 12 different pieces, and it's kind of a zipper joints that build the entire outfit. But it's also it wasn't so easy because this kind of CAD design should be very accurate. So zipper we can control, and it's much easier than designing it in a CAD design. But it's kind of rethinking about how you can build together different joints inside a digital file.
Right. Great. Cool. And here's actually an interesting question. So how the textile can be printed in 3D and what kind of materials? So I know you talked a little bit about the materials that are using. Could you expand a little bit on maybe some of the materials like resin and some of a little bit more of that process of designing?
Yeah, so I work both with PolyJet technology and FDM. So both of them are methods that we were developing also with Stratasys, but also in a collaboration with other companies that really thinking about what it means to design in 3D. So right now it's really, really difficult to build in a traditional way 3D textiles. So we can produce it using 3D knitting, but it's also limited. And then in using CAD software, you have the ability to design in Z dimension as much as you want. So what I've been working on is also, it's kind of resin, so it's type of plastics, but also I've been working with flexible materials and TPUs and flexible PLA, which is lots of things that I actually showed were designed using soft materials. So it's already really in a production. And it's not just in like huge 3D printers. It's also in a homemade setup.
Awesome, great. And just to clarify a clarification question here, it looks like the material can sense the temperature of the body. Is this correct? And they were wondering if the material that might have applications in the health field.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been working on is also printing directly onto fabrics, and that's where you can really expand the knowledge of textiles and use different types of materials that are already fabricated. And I actually worked with materials that can change color and change their temperature, and then indicate different properties of the outcome of the fabric. So once you can design with one material, you can implement lots of other materials. And one of the things that I also worked on is the idea of combining hard and soft materials. So you can really choose where do you need hard material, when do you need soft materials, and implement those kind of like rigidity gradient inside the design.
Okay, great. And for conductive threads, here's a question specifically for that. I'm wondering, how can one ensure longevity? So silver might oxidize and other materials might be hard to weave with. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I worked in the embroidery is also having the ability to layer the conductive threads, so you can also cover the conductive threads and kind of protect it. So in different methods, it's much harder to kind of cover these conductive threads because weaving, it's very hard to implement something that is all covered, or even with knitting, it's much harder. But with the idea of making embroidery on top, you can really work on a stitch level, and that's where lots of things in the design of the embroidered conductive thread was really implemented inside.
Great. And a few more questions. Thank you, everybody, for engaging in this. So what is the full width embroidery manufacture that you use for the floral conductive fabrics?
It was around 1.5 meter length, squared. So it was really a big scale. And it's not so common actually to make a large scale manufacturing, but I worked with the company that's called Sour, and then we kind of worked together on this large scale. So once I had the method in a one flower or like 4 flowers that worked, we can implement it into the large scale. And also having this kind of with embroidery, it's not so easy also to have something that is stable. So we needed to learn how to make it in a big scale, but also to have the structure that will hold itself.
Interesting. Okay. And have you worked with carbon fiber as a base material to create invisibility, either for military applications or commercial? That is an interesting concept.
Yeah, I never worked with, never had a chance, but I think it's also interesting to work with this kind of materials that also can form really well the body curvature, and then implement that inside it's much easier, I think, to work with materials that can be harder than the soft ones. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And questions are still coming, so let's keep it going. In terms of a home setup, have you shared anything online about the tech and materials? And maybe that's actually a good question. Would you be able to explain a little bit more about the software applications maybe that you use for some of this workflow?
Do you mean by the 3D printing ones?
It doesn't specify, but yeah, let's start with the 3D printing.
Yeah, so I'm working with Rhino and Grasshopper, so it's a very common softwares for architecture and for lots of designs. But then lots of things that I've been working on is really this kind of 3D body scan and playing with this scan inside the virtual space. So I've been studying a lot of techniques that I can re-topologize the body and remake and actually work with kind of the virtual analyzing that the polygons allows me, and then implement different structures that also got extracted from this kind of point clouds or patterns that are having this parametric design already embedded. Yeah. So I think lots of things that I've been doing were studying how also this digitally aesthetics can be implemented in what I've been doing.
Great. Yeah, and in terms of the software, I know I saw pictures of Motion Builder and Unity, so it does seem like you are using quite a bit of like game design and 3D content development applications for this as well.
Yeah, right. So lots of things, all the VR aspects were developed in Unity. And then, yeah, I've been working with, Oculus Quest and trying to implement also this kind of VR world into this workflow. But I also been working with WebGL and then trying to also not having the fashion show, for example, just also having it in an internet setup and not just in the headset.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Another question just about materials. Any graphene-based material for permeability or other attributes?
I never had a chance yet, but it's a good comment. And maybe you can also, we can work together. I'm very open to work. If anyone thinks that it's actually a good implementation of what they're researching, I'm happy to also to think together how we can work together.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this whole project kind of brings up that concept of what kind of materials we can use, all the way from carbon fiber to graphene. So, yeah, if anybody, in this chat has, wants to reach out to Ganit or ourselves a little bit more, feel free. We'll post our emails at the end. And in terms, to go back quickly to the VR, and maybe regarding haptics, could you simulate the feeling of wind, pressure, or other objects, such as the impact of falling object in VR and AR? I don't know if you can maybe talk a little bit about maybe the feeling of the garment on your body in VR and AR.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, how you actually implement different sensation inside this virtual space, and maybe having more reality feeling. So I think fabrics are all about tactile and this kind of interaction with the body, and then having this atmosphere related is also a really good an addition. I never had a chance yet to work with like pressure or like kind of falling object yet, but that's something that can be also learned through this kind of body skin relationship.
Right. Awesome. Cool. Just a couple more. Let's see. So I wonder, what are some of the features that 3D printing cannot replace about traditional textiles, and vice versa?
So that's a really good point. I think there are a lot of aspects that cannot be fully translated, and I think it's about scales of fibers. It's very, very hard to 3D print fibers. We can go very, very precise in many technology right now, and especially with polyjet technology, we can work on nanoscale printing, but the materials are not a continuous material. So it works like a drop, or in FDM it works in a larger scale. And I think slowly we are entering into this world that we are going to a nanoscale of materials and trying to implement much more understanding of materiality inside virtual and physical connection. But also I think what I'm really interested in is this studying of digital materials and what it means to have something that is materials in the digital space. And I think that's where I'm studying this kind of gradient of rigidity. And when you can manipulate different flexibility in different areas, you're kind of developing your own structure. And I think that's much harder to do in traditional textile manufacturing, because you are very much dependent on the yarn properties. And even though lots of textile manufacturings are digitally made, they are still depending on a physical yarn. And even in the most complex digital knit software and the implementation of that, you are still need to really write the properties of this physical yarn. And I think once we can simulate different aspects in the virtual space and go in a nanoscale, it will be much easier to print and not replace traditional methods, but also learning how we are designing textiles in more conscious way and not depending only on physical yarns.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question. Another one, this is always great to consider. Are there any environmental or sustainability concerns with the materials that are being used?
Yeah, so that's also a really big area that I'm researching, and I could go also back a bit of the presentation, but one of the projects, maybe I will show it. One of the projects that I've been working on is the production of 3D printed fabrics that produced with only this one. So it's made from recycled fabric from leftovers of water bottles, but also the printed parts were also recycled from a 3D printed manufactured of filament. So it's kind of also thinking about how we are in using additive manufacturing, we can really reuse materials and reshape it and think about how we are really developing new methods that are considering environmental change, but also the concept of customization for garments. It's the idea of how you customize the exact materials that you need to manufacture, and then kind of shifting from mass production to customization of the need. And I think that's a really big concept, which is not so easy to implement, but I think that's where we study more and more this concept. I think when you have something that's related to your body or to your need, it's much more valuable. And I think this value is very important to also sustainable future.
Yeah. Awesome. Ganit, thank you so much for answering all these questions. And participants, thank you all for being so engaging. Do you have, we'll finish up with this one last question. I'm looking at the time now. So do you have data sets of different people for the purposes of designing garments in a virtual environment? I'd imagine the combination with your work might greatly enhance workflows of designers.
Wait, I need to
so maybe that's a question for maybe use cases? Where do you see this going? Do you see this as more kind of an individual to go in, get their body scanned and get custom fits, or do you see some practical applications for this?
Yeah, so I think it's also a really good question, because I don't see this process just as a virtual study. And that's where also mentalists were always talking that we have all these tools to do things virtually, but then how you actually translate this to manufacturing. And I think this kind of enhancing the workflow of designers and having these workflows that is easier, it's one of the missions, I think, to make the implementation of this data into the real world easier. And I think the question was, do you have data sets of different people for the purpose of design?
Yeah.
So I have I've been working for a few years on different body scans and kind of also comparing these data sets, but it's more designing from the scan rather than designing the garment. So a lot of times I'm designing the garment on top of the scan, and that's how the garment is made. And it's the opposite way in the traditional way that you produce the garment and then you implement it to the body. So it's kind of reverse engineering the concept.
Awesome. And I think I got to all the questions. Where could one find more about maybe the sensors in the garments and the potential? It looks like body temperature, humidity, and environments. Are there any resources you can share?
Sure. You can also email me with any question. But for sensors, I think there are lots of specific things that is greatly documented. And if there is specific things I can help, I can also email. You can also feel free to email me.
Well, Ganit, thank you so much for your answers and your presentation today. So everybody, that is going to conclude our Immerse series for today. Our next one is planned for the second week in February. So that should be all about spatial audio. We just installed and outfitted the immersion lab with our new Dolby Atmos system. So definitely attend that if you guys are interested in quadraphonic playback or synthetic sound generation. So Ganit, thank you so much for the talk again today. And if anybody has any other questions, you can email Ganit or the Immersion Lab. So thank you all again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.